Rebecca stood at the front door of the old house and just stared. The paint was peeling off in long strips. The porch sagged on one side, and honestly, the whole place looked like it might collapse if she sneezed too hard. This was her inheritance. Lucky her. She pushed the door open and immediately regretted it. The smell hit her like a wall. Dust, mildew, and something else she couldn't quite identify but definitely didn't want to. Every surface was covered in stuff. Mountains of newspapers stacked against walls. Boxes piled on boxes. Furniture buried under blankets and clothes and things she couldn't even name. Yet her aunt had lived here for 43 years, alone, and apparently never threw anything away. Rebecca was 34 years old, unemployed for 2 months, and down to her last $800 in savings. Her landlord back in Denver had just raised the rent again. Her car needed new brakes, and her credit card bills were piling up faster than she could ignore them. And now this, a whole house full of junk in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, that somehow became her problem. She hadn't even known her aunt that well. Aunt Elena was her dad's older sister, the one nobody talked about much at family gatherings. The weird one, the hermit. Rebecca had maybe met her 5 times in her entire life, and most of those were when she was too young to remember properly. But apparently Rebecca was the only niece Elena had, and when you're the only niece, you get the house. Lucky her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another text from her brother. Just sell it and split the money. Why are you making this complicated? Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one standing in this mess. He wasn't the one who had to figure out what to do with 40 years of accumulated chaos. And honestly, what money? The real estate agent she'd spoken to on the phone had been polite but clear. The house needed extensive repairs. The location was remote. The market was slow. If she was lucky, she might get enough to cover the property, taxes, and maybe have a little left over. Not exactly the windfall her brother seemed to think it was. Rebecca set her bag down on the least dusty surface she could find and pulled out her notebook. She'd made a plan on the drive up. It was a good plan. A simple plan. Spend a week here, maybe 2 at most. Sort everything into 3 categories: sell, donate, or trash. Hire someone to haul away the garbage. Clean up the house enough to make it presentable. List it with a realtor. Get back to Denver and figure out her life. Simple. She started in the living room, or what she thought was the living room. It was hard to tell under all the stuff. There were books everywhere, stacks of them on the floor, crammed into shelves piled on the coffee table. Most of them looked ancient, with cracked spines and yellowed pages. She picked one up. Geology of the Rocky Mountains, 1967, another one. Mining techniques and safety procedures, and another. The History of Colorado Gold Rush. Weird. Her aunt had been obsessed with rocks and mining? Nobody had mentioned that. Rebecca kept digging. Under a pile of magazines from the 1980s, she found more books about minerals, geology, surveying. There was even a framed map on the wall showing old mining claims in the area, marked up with colored pins and handwritten notes. Her aunt really had been obsessed. For a moment, Rebecca felt a strange pang of sadness. This woman had spent decades in this house alone with her books and her maps, and for what? What had she been searching for? What had she been thinking about all those years? She shook her head. No time for getting emotional. She had work to do. The first day was exhausting. By evening, Rebecca had managed to clear one corner of one room. Just one corner. At this rate, she'd be here for months. Her back hurt. Her hands were filthy, and she'd sneezed so many times she'd lost count. She drove into the nearest town, which was 20 minutes away and consisted of one gas station, one diner, and a handful of houses. The diner served exactly 3 things: burgers, chicken fried steak, and pie. She ordered a burger and tried not to think about how her savings account was draining with every passing day. The next morning, she started on the dining room. More books, more papers, more stuff. But also something interesting: file folders. Lots of them, organized and labeled in neat handwriting. Property taxes 2015-2020. House repairs. Medical records. And one that caught her eye. Family history. Rebecca opened it. Inside were old photographs, some so faded she could barely make out the faces. There were documents too. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, and something else. Land deeds. She pulled one out and studied it. It was dated 1882. The paper was brittle and brown with age, but the words were still readable. It was a mining claim, registered to someone named Thomas and Catherine Miller. Her great-great-grandparents, apparently. There were more documents, transfer papers, survey maps, letters written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting. It looked like this mining claim had been in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, though nobody had actually mined it in decades. Rebecca had never even heard about this. Why would she? Nobody in her family had ever mentioned owning a mining claim. It was probably worthless anyway, just a piece of history, interesting but useless. She put the folder aside and kept working. Days passed. The house slowly, painfully slowly began to reveal itself. Rebecca fell into a routine. Wake up, choke down instant coffee, sort through junk until her brain went numb, drive to town for terrible food, come back, sort more, collapse into the lumpy guest bed, repeat. She was on her 6th day when she decided to tackle the attic. The attic stairs were steep and narrow, and they creaked with every step. The air up there was even dustier than the rest of the house, and the single window barely let in any light. Rebecca used her phone flashlight to navigate around boxes and old furniture, and there, in the far corner under a pile of moth-eaten blankets, she found it. A wooden chest. It was old, maybe as old as the house itself. The wood was dark and worn smooth in places. And it was locked. A heavy brass padlock hung from the latch, covered in dust but still solid. Rebecca's heart started beating faster. She didn't know why. It was probably nothing. More papers, more junk. But something about that locked chest made her curious in a way nothing else in this house had. She searched the attic for a key but found nothing. Back downstairs, she started going through drawers in the bedroom, the kitchen, anywhere she could think of. Finally, in the back of a desk drawer, she found a small brass key on a worn ribbon. Her hands were actually shaking a little as she climbed back up to the attic. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet attic. Rebecca lifted the lid. Inside were journals. Dozens of them. Leather-bound notebooks filled with her aunt's handwriting. And underneath those, maps. Not old maps like the ones downstairs, but new ones. Recent ones. Detailed geological surveys. Official-looking documents with stamps and signatures. Rebecca picked up the top journal and opened it to a random page. Year 23 of the search, her aunt had written. I know everyone thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But the family stories have to mean something. The claim has to mean something. I've spent my whole life on this, and I'm not going to stop now. Rebecca sat down hard on an old trunk. The journal opened in her lap and started reading. And just like that, everything changed. Rebecca spent the entire night in that attic reading by the light of her phone. She only came down when her battery died and she needed to plug it in. The journals were incredible, not because they were well written or entertaining, but because they told the story of a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to a single obsession, finding out if the family mining claim was worth anything. Aunt Elena's first entry was from 1981. She'd been 23 years old, fresh out of college with a geology degree. Her father, Rebecca's grandfather, had just passed away and left her some old family documents. Among them was the mining claim deed. Dad always said there was gold in those hills, Elena had written in neat, careful handwriting. Everyone laughed at him, called him a dreamer. But what if he was right? What if everyone else was wrong? The early journals were full of hope and excitement. Elena had researched everything she could about the claim. She'd visited the county records office. She'd hiked out to the actual site, which was apparently about 15 miles from the house up in the mountains. She'd collected rock samples and tried to get them analyzed, but she'd run into problems. Big ones. First, she didn't have money. Proper geological surveys were expensive. Mining equipment was expensive. Everything was expensive. On her salary as a substitute teacher, she could barely afford to keep researching, let alone actually dig. Second, nobody took her seriously. This was the early 80s. A young woman showing up at mining offices and surveying companies, asking about old claims and mineral deposits. The journals were filled with stories of men who dismissed her, laughed at her, or tried to scam her. Mr. Patterson at Rocky Mountain Surveys told me I was wasting my time, one entry read. He actually patted my hand and told me to find a nice husband instead. I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. Rebecca found herself smiling at that. Good for you, Aunt Elena. As the years went on, The journals changed. The excitement dimmed. Elena's entries became shorter, more clinical. Just facts and observations, dates and measurements. She'd stopped writing about her feelings altogether, but she never stopped searching. She'd worked 3 jobs at some points, saving every penny. She'd taught herself advanced geology from library books. She'd spent her vacations hiking the mountains, taking samples, making maps. Year after year after year. And then, in a journal from 2019, Rebecca found something that made her sit up straight. Finally convinced Summit Geological to do a preliminary survey. Cost me $8,000, almost everything I'd saved. They think I'm crazy too, but at least they took my money. Results in 6 weeks. Rebecca flipped through the pages frantically. 6 weeks later, there it was. The survey came back. I was right. I was right. There are significant mineral deposits on the claim. Not gold, like the old stories said. Something better. Lithium. The surveyor said it's a substantial deposit, possibly commercial grade. He seemed surprised. Told me I should consider selling the claim to a mining company. Rebecca's hands were shaking again. Lithium. Even she knew what that meant. Electric car batteries. Energy storage. That stuff was valuable. Really valuable. But the next entry was heartbreaking. I'm 62 years old. I've spent 40 years on this. And now that I know I was right, I don't have the strength to see it through. The survey was preliminary. To actually prove the deposit is worth mining, I'd need a full geological study. That costs over $100,000. Money I'll never have. I contacted 3 mining companies. 2 never called back. One offered me $15,000 for the claim. $15,000 for 40 years of my life. The entries after that were sporadic. Elena's handwriting got shakier. She mentioned doctor visits, medications, being tired all the time. The last entry was from 8 months before she died. I'm leaving everything to Rebecca, Michael's daughter. I barely know her, but she's smart. I've watched her from a distance over the years. Maybe she'll know what to do with all this. Maybe she'll think I was crazy too. But at least someone will know I was right. That's something. Rebecca closed the journal and just sat there in the dusty attic as the sun came up outside. Her aunt had been right. She'd spent her whole life being right, and nobody had believed her. And now it was Rebecca's problem. She climbed down from the attic and made coffee. Real coffee this time. Driving into town to buy some from the gas station. She needed to think clearly. The logical thing to do was simple. Take the survey results to a mining company. Sell the claim. Take whatever money they offered. Even if it was just $20,000 or $30,000, that would solve her immediate problems. Pay off some debt. Buy time to find a new job. But something bothered her about that. Maybe it was reading her aunt's journals. Maybe it was knowing that Elena had been lowballed and dismissed her entire life. Maybe Rebecca was just stubborn. She pulled out the geological survey from the chest. It was technical, full of terms she didn't understand. But some things were clear. The lithium deposit was significant. The location was favorable for extraction. The potential was commercially viable. Rebecca opened her laptop and started researching. She learned more about lithium in 3 hours than she'd ever wanted to know. The demand was skyrocketing. New deposits were valuable. Really valuable. Companies were desperate to secure domestic sources. She found articles about small mining operations, about people who'd developed their own claims. It was possible. Difficult, but possible. The problem was always the same thing that had stopped her aunt: money. To prove the deposit was really worth something, she'd need a full geological study. That meant hiring professional geologists, doing core samples, analyzing everything properly. The cheapest quotes she found online were around $80,000. The expensive ones went up to $200,000, money she absolutely did not have. Rebecca spent the next 3 days making phone calls. She contacted mining companies, geological firms, mineral rights lawyers. Most of the conversations went nowhere. A few companies offered to buy the claim site unseen, based on the preliminary survey. The highest offer was $45,000. $45,000. That was more money than Rebecca had seen in years. It would change her life. Pay off her credit cards, cover rent for months while she found work. Give her breathing room, but it felt wrong. Her aunt had been offered $15,000 and knew it was too low. Was $45,000 any better? What if the deposit was worth millions? She called her brother to talk it through. Take the money, he said immediately. Are you kidding? $45,000 for some old mining claim? That's amazing. Take it and run. But what if it's worth more? What if it's worth nothing? What if that survey was wrong? What if there's nothing up there but rocks? You're broke, Rebecca. You need this money. Don't be stupid, he had a point. She was broke. She did need money. Being smart meant taking the sure thing, not gambling on maybes. But that night she read through more of Elena's journals. She read about every time someone had told her aunt to give up, every time someone had laughed, every time someone had called her crazy, and she thought about how close Elena had come. How she'd been right all along but never got to see it pay off. Rebecca made a decision. Probably a stupid one. Definitely a risky one. She wasn't going to sell. She was going to find a way to prove the deposit herself. To finish what her aunt had started. Even if it was crazy. Even if everyone thought she'd lost her mind, she had no idea how she was going to do it. But she was going to try. The next morning, she drove back into town and asked the waitress at the diner if there were any geological surveyors in the area. The waitress thought for a moment, then wrote down a name and number on a napkin. Try this guy. He's retired now, but he used to do mineral surveys all over Colorado. Lives about 30 miles from here. Bit of an oddball, but he knows his stuff. Rebecca took the napkin, left a tip, and headed for her car. Time to see if she was as crazy as her aunt, or as right. The retired geologist lived in a cabin that looked like it had been built from spare parts. Mismatched siding, a roof with 3 different types of shingles, and a front porch held up by what appeared to be railroad ties. But the view was incredible. Mountains stretched out in every direction, and the air smelled like pine trees and snow. Rebecca knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. "I'm around back," a voice called out. "Follow the path." She walked around the side of the cabin and found an old man in his 70s, bent over a workbench covered in rocks. He wore thick glasses and a flannel shirt with holes in both elbows. He didn't look up when she approached. "You the girl who called about the lithium claim?" "Yes, sir. I'm Rebecca. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me. Didn't agree to anything. Just said I'd listen." He finally looked up at her, studying her face with sharp blue eyes. "You're Elena Miller's niece," Rebecca was surprised. "You knew my aunt?" "Knew of her. She came to see me once, must have been 15 years ago. Wanted me to look at her research. I was still working full-time back then. Didn't have time for what I thought was some wild goose chase. Told her to contact my company, go through the official channels. She never did. Probably couldn't afford it." He set down the rock he'd been examining. "Heard she passed. Sorry about that." "Thank you." Rebecca pulled out the folder she'd brought. "I have her research, and a preliminary survey from 2019. I was hoping you could look at it and tell me if it's worth pursuing." He took the folder without a word and started reading. Rebecca stood there awkwardly, not sure if she should sit down or stay standing or maybe just leave and come back later. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at her again. "This is good work. Real good work. Your aunt knew what she was doing. This preliminary survey is legitimate, too. Summit Geological is a solid outfit." He paused. "But you know a preliminary survey isn't enough, right? To actually develop this claim, you need a full geological assessment, core drilling, comprehensive analysis, environmental studies. We're talking serious money. I know. That's why I'm here. I need to know if it's worth it. If the deposit is really as valuable as the preliminary survey suggests." He picked up one of the rocks from his workbench, turned it over in his weathered hands. "Here's the thing about mining. It's all gambling. You can have every survey in the world telling you there's treasure underground, but until you actually dig it up, you don't know for sure. I've seen guaranteed claims turn out to be worthless, and I've seen long shots that made people millionaires. So you're saying I shouldn't do it? I'm saying you need to understand what you're getting into. Based on these documents, yeah, there's probably a significant lithium deposit on your land. The geological markers are right. The location makes sense. If I had to bet, I'd say it's real." He set the rock down. "But proving it? That'll cost you at least $80,000. Probably more like 100. And that's just to prove it exists. Actually mining it? That's a whole different animal." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. She'd known it would be expensive, but hearing it said out loud made it real. She had $700 in her bank account. What if I can't afford the full survey? Is there any cheaper way to get more information? The old man thought about it for a moment. I could do a basic assessment for you. Go up to the site, take some samples, give you my professional opinion. Won't be official. Won't be enough to get investors or permits, but it'd tell you if you're wasting your time or not. Charge you $1,000 for 2 days' work. $1,000. Rebecca did the math in her head. She could put it on her credit card. Barely. She was already maxed out on 2 cards, but the third one still had a little room. Okay, let's do it. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? That's a lot of money to spend on a maybe. I'm sure she wasn't sure at all. But she said it anyway. They arranged to meet at the claim site in 3 days. That gave Rebecca time to locate the exact property boundaries and get access permits sorted out. It also gave her time to panic about what she was doing. She called her brother again. That was a mistake. You're spending $1,000 on what? Are you out of your mind? You don't have $1,000. You don't have $100. Take the offer from the mining company and stop playing prospector. I just need to know if it's real. It doesn't matter if it's real. You can't afford to develop it anyway. So what difference does it make? Take the money. Move on with your life. He hung up on her. Rebecca sat in the old house surrounded by her aunt's 40 years of research and wondered if he was right. Maybe she was being stupid. Maybe she was letting emotion cloud her judgment. But she kept thinking about that journal entry. I was right. I was right. Her aunt had spent her entire life being dismissed and ignored, and she'd been right the whole time. Rebecca wasn't going to dismiss her too. The day of the site visit came. She met the geologist at the base of the mountain road at 6 in the morning. He arrived in an ancient jeep that looked like it had survived several wars. They drove up a dirt road that made Rebecca's car seem luxurious by comparison. The claim site was beautiful. A rocky slope covered in scrub brush and wildflowers with mountains rising up behind it. No buildings, no signs anyone had been there in years, just wilderness. The geologist got out and immediately started examining the ground. He moved slowly, methodically, picking up rocks and studying them, taking measurements, making notes. Rebecca followed him around, trying to stay out of the way. Hours passed. He drilled several small core samples using a portable drill. He tested the soil. He consulted maps and instruments that Rebecca didn't recognize. He barely spoke except to ask her to hand him things from his equipment bag. By mid-afternoon, Rebecca's feet hurt and she was sunburned and anxious. She couldn't read his expression at all. Was he finding something good? Something bad? Nothing at all? Finally, as the sun started to get lower in the sky, he packed up his equipment and turned to her. Well? Rebecca asked, unable to wait any longer. He pulled off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. Put them back on. Looked at her for a long moment. Your aunt was right. This is a significant deposit. High-grade lithium carbonate, excellent concentration, accessible location. If this were my claim, I'd develop it. Rebecca felt her heart stop. Really? Really? Now I can't give you exact numbers without more testing, but based on what I've seen today, if you can prove this deposit with a full survey, you're looking at something valuable. Very valuable. How valuable? He shrugged. Hard to say. Conservative estimate? Several $1,000,000, possibly more depending on the size of the deposit and market prices. But that's assuming everything checks out with the full survey. Several $1,000,000. The words didn't seem real, so what do I do now? Now comes the hard part. You need to decide if you're willing to bet everything on this, because that's what it'll take. You'll need to mortgage the house, max out your credit, borrow from anyone who'll lend to you. You'll need at least $80,000 to do this right, maybe more. And there's still a chance it won't work out. The deposit could be smaller than we think. Prices could drop. 100 things could go wrong. But if it does work out, if it works out, you'll never have to worry about money again. You could pay off every debt, help your family, live comfortably for the rest of your life. That's the dream anyway. Rebecca looked out at the rocky slope, imagining her aunt standing in this same spot, believing in something no one else could see. I want to do it. The geologist nodded slowly. Then you better get started. It's going to be a rough ride. That night, Rebecca sat down with her laptop and started making a list. She looked up how to get a loan with bad credit. She researched mortgaging inherited property. She calculated exactly how much money she could scrape together from every possible source. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But she'd figure it out. Somehow. 3 days later, she walked into a bank in Denver with her aunt's geological survey, the geologist's report, and the deed to the property. She asked to speak to someone about a business loan. The loan officer was polite but skeptical. A woman with no job, bad credit, and a wild story about a lithium mine. It didn't exactly scream good investment, but Rebecca had learned something from reading her aunt's journals. She'd learned not to give up when people said no. She'd learned to keep trying. She was turned down by that bank, and the next one, and the one after that. But on her 4th try, she found a loan officer who actually listened, who looked at the surveys, who saw the potential. "This is risky," he said. "Really risky. But I'll tell you what. I'll recommend approval for a loan secured by the property, but you'll need to provide a personal guarantee, and the interest rate won't be great. How much can you lend me?" $50,000. "That's the best I can do." It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Rebecca shook his hand. "I'll take it." Rebecca signed the loan papers with shaking hands. $50,000. The most money she'd ever been responsible for in her life, and it still wasn't enough. She needed at least $30,000 more to hire a proper geological firm and get the full survey done. She maxed out her remaining credit card. That gave her another $8,000. She sold her car and bought a beat-up truck for cash, pocketing the difference, $4,000 more. She sold everything in her Denver apartment that had any value. Her TV, her laptop, her furniture, even her nice winter coat. Another $2,000, still not enough. Her brother found out what she was doing and called her furious. "You sold your car? Your car? What are you going to do when this all falls apart and you need to get to a job interview? You're throwing your life away for a fantasy." "It's not a fantasy." The geologist confirmed it. "The deposit is real. A deposit being real doesn't mean you can actually mine it. Do you have any idea what you're doing? This isn't some hobby. This is mining. You need equipment, permits, environmental studies, labor, insurance. Even if there's lithium up there, you can't just dig it up yourself." He was right, and that was the worst part. Rebecca had been researching mining operations for weeks now, and the more she learned, the more complicated it got. The full geological survey was just the first step. After that came permits, which could take months or years. Then equipment, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then actually extracting and processing the lithium, which required expertise she didn't have. But she'd come too far to stop now. She took out a cash advance on another credit card, even though the interest rate made her want to cry. She borrowed $3,000 from an old friend who probably shouldn't have lent it to her. She even went through her aunt's house and sold everything of value. Antique furniture, old jewelry, books, tools. Every dollar went into the mining fund. Finally, 3 months after that first visit to the claim site, she had enough. Barely. She hired Rocky Peak Geological Services, paid them $75,000 and waited. The survey took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Rebecca living in her aunt's house with no income, watching her bank account drain away while she paid for food and gas and interest on all those loans. 6 weeks of barely sleeping, of checking her email every 10 minutes, of second-guessing every decision she'd made. Her brother stopped calling. Her friends stopped texting back. Everyone thought she'd lost her mind, and maybe she had. The preliminary report came first, delivered by email on a Tuesday morning. Rebecca's hands were shaking so hard she could barely scroll through the PDF. The lithium deposit was real. More than real. It was larger than the initial survey had suggested. High-grade ore, excellent concentration, estimated at several 100,000 tons of lithium carbonate. The geologists estimated the value of the deposit at current market prices at somewhere between $30 and $50 million. Rebecca read that number 3 times before it actually registered. $50 million. Under her aunt's property. Under her property now. She called the retired geologist who'd done the initial assessment. "Did you see the report?" "I saw it. Congratulations. Your aunt would be proud." "What do I do now?" There was a long pause. "Now you have to decide how you want to play this. You've got 3 options. 1, you sell the claim outright to a mining company. With this survey, you could probably get somewhere between $5 and $10 million. 2, you lease the mining rights to a company and take royalties on whatever they extract. That's less money up front, but potentially more in the long run. 3, you develop it yourself. Can I even do option 3? Develop it myself? Technically? Yes, practically. It's going to be incredibly difficult. You'd need to raise capital, hire a mining crew, get all your permits in order, deal with environmental regulations. It could take years and cost millions before you see any profit. But if you pull it off, you'd keep all the profits instead of splitting them with a mining company. Rebecca thanked him and hung up. She sat in her aunt's kitchen staring at the report on her laptop screen and tried to think clearly. The smart move was obvious. Sell the claim. Take the money. Pay off her debts and live comfortably for the rest of her life. That's what any reasonable person would do. But she kept thinking about her aunt. About all those journal entries. About how Elena had been offered pennies for something worth millions. About how she'd been dismissed and ignored her entire life. If Rebecca sold now, she'd be doing okay. But the mining company would make tens of millions of dollars off her family's land, just like they would have done to her aunt if she'd sold when she was desperate. It didn't sit right. Rebecca started making phone calls again. This time to mining consultants and small operation managers, people who actually knew how to develop a claim. Most of them laughed when they heard her story. A woman with no mining experience, no money, trying to develop a lithium mine? Impossible, but one person didn't laugh. A mining supervisor named Frank who'd worked in Colorado for 30 years. He listened to her whole story, looked at her geological reports, and then shocked her by saying, "I think you could actually do this." Really? Really, but not the way you're thinking. You can't afford to develop this as a traditional mining operation. That would cost millions. What you need is a small-scale pilot operation. Extract enough lithium to prove the mine is profitable. Then use that to attract investors or negotiate a better deal with a big mining company. How much would that cost? To do it right? Maybe $500,000. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's nothing compared to full-scale development. $500,000. Rebecca had exactly $342 in her checking account. But Frank walked her through it. She could get some of the money through grants for small mining operations. Some through investors if she pitched it right, some through additional loans now that she had proof of the deposit's value. It would mean going even deeper into debt. It would mean spending the next year of her life doing nothing but working on this mine. It would mean risking absolutely everything. "I need to think about it," Rebecca said. "Don't think too long. Word gets out about a deposit this size, and you'll have mining companies knocking down your door with offers. Some of those offers might be good, but they'll all be designed to make them rich, not you." Rebecca spent 3 days walking around her aunt's property trying to decide. She read through all the journals again. She called her brother one more time. "Just sell it," he said, but his voice was tired now, not angry. "Please, you've already proven Aunt Elena was right. You've done enough. Take the money and be happy." On the third day, Rebecca drove back up to the claim site. She stood there as the sun set, painting the mountains orange and pink, and she made her decision. She was going to develop the mine herself. The next morning, she called Frank. "I'm in. Tell me what I need to do." What followed were the hardest 3 months of Rebecca's life. Frank helped her put together a business plan and investment pitch. They presented it to small investors, mining equipment companies, even a few wealthy individuals who liked high-risk ventures. Most said no. Some said maybe. A few said yes. Slowly, painfully, Rebecca scraped together investment commitments. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. A mining equipment company agreed to lease her machinery at a reduced rate in exchange for a small stake in the operation. She got permits. She hired a small crew of experienced miners who were willing to work for lower wages in exchange for profit sharing. She bought insurance. She set up environmental monitoring systems. She did 1,000 things she'd never done before and had no idea how to do. And then, on a cold November morning, 6 months after she'd first gotten the geological report, the drilling began. Rebecca stood at the site, watching the crew set up equipment, and felt terrified. She was now almost $300,000 in debt. She'd mortgaged her aunt's house. She'd convinced a dozen people to invest in her crazy dream. If this didn't work, she would lose everything. She'd probably end up bankrupt. The first week of drilling produced nothing but rock and dirt. The second week, same thing. Rebecca couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. She checked the site every day, watching the crew work, seeing money drain away with every hour of operation. The mining consultant had warned her this might happen. Sometimes it took time to find the good ore, even when you knew it was there, but knowing that didn't make it easier. On the third week, on a Thursday afternoon, Rebecca got a call from Frank. "You need to get up here now." She drove up to the site faster than she should have, her heart pounding. When she arrived, the entire crew was standing around one of the drill holes, staring down at something. Frank saw her and broke into a huge grin. "We hit it. This is high-grade stuff. Really high-grade. Better than the survey predicted." Rebecca looked down at the core sample. Even she could see it. The rock was streaked with lighter mineral deposits, visible even to her untrained eye. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. She stood there on that mountain, surrounded by people who'd believed in her when everyone else thought she was crazy, and she started to cry. Not sad tears. Not happy tears exactly either. Just overwhelming, complicated relief tears. Her aunt had been right. And now, finally, someone was going to prove it to the world. The news spread fast, too fast. Within a week of striking the high-grade lithium ore, Rebecca started getting calls from people she'd never heard of. Mining companies, investment firms, reporters. Everyone wanted a piece of what she'd found. A company called Western Mineral Holdings offered her $12 million for the claim. Just like that. $12 million. More money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to pay off every debt, help her family, and live comfortably for the rest of her life. She said no. Another company offered $15 million plus royalties. She said no to that too. Her brother came to visit her for the first time since she'd started the whole project. He walked around the mining site, watched the crew working, and then pulled her aside. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I thought you were crazy. I thought you were throwing your life away. But you did it. You actually did it. We're not done yet. We've only extracted a few tons so far. There's still so much that could go wrong, but you proved it. The mine works. The lithium is real. You could sell right now and never work another day in your life." Rebecca looked out at the mountain, at the equipment and the crew and everything she'd built. "I know, but I'm not ready to sell yet." The operation grew. With proof that the mine was producing high-quality lithium, Rebecca was able to secure more investment. A venture capital firm specializing in green energy gave her $2 million in exchange for a 20% stake. An equipment company upgraded their machinery. She hired more workers. But with success came problems she hadn't anticipated. Environmental groups started protesting the mine. They showed up with signs, blocked access roads, contacted local news stations. They said she was destroying wildlife habitat, polluting water sources, ruining the mountain. Rebecca met with them, showed them all her environmental permits and monitoring systems, explained how careful they were being. Some of them listened. Most didn't. To them, she was just another greedy person tearing up the earth for profit. That hurt more than she expected. She wasn't greedy. She was just trying to finish what her aunt started. But she understood their concerns. The mountain was beautiful. Mining was destructive. There was no way around that fact. She hired an environmental consultant and implemented even stricter protections, created buffer zones around water sources, set up wildlife cameras and monitoring stations. It cost more money and slowed down production, but it felt like the right thing to do. Then distant relatives started coming out of the woodwork. People she'd never met, claiming they deserved a share of the mine. A cousin twice removed showed up with a lawyer, saying his grandmother had been promised part of the original claim. An uncle she hadn't seen in 20 years suddenly wanted to reconnect and discuss family property rights. Rebecca spent thousands of dollars on lawyers, defending the claim against challenges that ranged from legitimate concerns to obvious cash grabs. It was exhausting and infuriating and sad all at once. Where were all these people when her aunt was alive and struggling? Where were they when Rebecca was maxing out credit cards and eating ramen every day? The stress was crushing. Some nights Rebecca sat in her aunt's house, now paid off but feeling emptier than ever, and wondered if it had been worth it. She'd achieved what she set out to do. The mine was working. She was going to be wealthy. But she felt more alone than she had when she was broke. Frank found her one evening sitting outside the mining office with her head in her hands. "Rough day?" he asked. "Rough month. Rough year. I don't know anymore." He sat down next to her. "You know what your aunt would say if she could see this? That I should have sold when I had the chance? No, she'd say you did exactly what needed to be done. You finished what she started. You proved everyone wrong." That meant everything to her. I could tell from her journals, from everything you've told me about her. Rebecca nodded slowly. He was right. This wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about refusing to be dismissed, about seeing something through to the end. But here's the thing, Frank continued. You've proved it now. Everyone knows the mine is real. Everyone knows you were right. So the question is, what do you actually want? Because you don't have to keep doing this. You've won already. That question stayed with Rebecca for weeks. What did she want? She didn't particularly enjoy running a mining operation. It was stressful and complicated and took up all her time. She missed having hobbies. She missed sleep. She missed having a life that wasn't consumed by ore grades and equipment maintenance and permit renewals. But she loved what the mine represented. Proof that her aunt's life had meant something. That women who get called crazy sometimes turn out to be visionaries. In the end, Rebecca made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She sold the mining rights to a major corporation for $22 million plus ongoing royalties. But she kept ownership of the land, and she used part of the money to establish something that would have made her aunt proud, the Elena Miller Foundation for Women in Mining and Geology, a scholarship fund and grant program for women pursuing careers in fields where they were still underestimated and dismissed. Women like her aunt. Women like herself. She donated $2 million to environmental restoration in the area around the mine, funding projects to protect wildlife and water quality. She gave money to the small town nearby, helping them improve their schools and infrastructure. She paid back every single person who'd lent her money or invested in her dream, with generous returns. Even the friend who'd loaned her $3,000 when she was desperate got a check for $20,000, and she set up a small museum in her aunt's house. Not a fancy place, just a few rooms where people could come see Elena's journals, her maps, her research. A place that told the story of a woman who spent 40 years being right, while everyone told her she was wrong. The local paper did a story about it. Then a Denver newspaper picked it up. Then a national news outlet. Before she knew it, Rebecca was being interviewed about persistence and belief and never giving up on your dreams. She hated every second of the interviews. She wasn't good at talking to reporters. She wasn't inspirational or articulate. She was just a woman who'd inherited a house and refused to give up on a crazy idea. But people connected with the story anyway. She got letters from women all over the country. Women who'd been dismissed by bosses, by colleagues, by family. Women who'd been told their ideas were stupid or impossible or not worth pursuing. Women who saw themselves in Elena's story, and now in Rebecca's. One letter came from a geology student who'd been thinking about dropping out because she was tired of being the only woman in every class, tired of professors who didn't take her seriously. Your aunt's story changed my mind, she wrote. If she could spend 40 years fighting, I can finish my degree. That letter made everything worth it. 2 years after she'd first walked into her aunt's dusty house, Rebecca stood at the mining site one last time before the corporation took over operations. The mountain looked different now, scarred but managed carefully. The mine was producing tons of lithium every month, feeding into batteries for electric cars all over the country. Her aunt had been right about everything. The mineral was there. It was valuable, and it was worth fighting for. But more than that, Elena had been right about something else, something Rebecca only understood now. It wasn't about the lithium. It was about refusing to disappear, about insisting that your voice mattered even when the world told you it didn't. Rebecca got in her truck, a much nicer one now, and drove back to the house. She was moving to Denver next month. She'd bought a condo there, enrolled in some business classes, started dating someone she actually liked. She was building a life again, a real one. Not just an obsession, but every room in her aunt's house, soon to become the museum, reminded her of where she'd come from, of how close she'd come to selling everything without looking deeper, of how easy it would have been to dismiss Elena's research as the fantasy of a lonely woman. She picked up one of her aunt's journals, the last one, and read the final entry again. Maybe Rebecca will know what to do with all this. Maybe she'll think I'm crazy too, but at least someone will know I was right. That's something. Rebecca smiled and closed the journal gently. I know, Aunt Elena, she said to the empty room. Everyone knows now. You were right about everything. And I made sure the whole world would remember. She turned off the lights and locked the door behind her. The house would open to visitors next month. A small but important memorial to a woman who never stopped believing in herself. And as Rebecca drove away, watching the mountains in her rearview mirror, she realized something. The real treasure wasn't the millions of dollars or the successful mine. It was learning that sometimes the crazy ones, the dismissed ones, the ones everyone laughs at, turn out to be the ones who change everything. Her aunt had taught her that. And now Rebecca would spend the rest of her life making sure no one forgot it.